Hello and welcome to the Food Programme. I'm Sheila Dillon. Cancer and what you eat. Is there a connection? Well, you might say, yes, obviously there is. But it wasn't so long ago that wasn't recognised at all by the medics that treat us when we're struck by the big C. Views on food as cancer prevention, healing, or even part of the treatment are changing now in the NHS. As I've seen as a patient and as a journalist since I first made a programme on the subject 20-odd years ago, long before my own diagnosis. So, have a listen. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a blood cancer, but it's a bone marrow cancer, actually affecting the way your blood is made, in late 2011.
What do you remember of that? How did that happen?
Well, it happened because I was dismissed for months by my GP practice as just being somebody with a bad back. But it was my Pilates teacher who figured out there was something wrong and sent me to a specialist. And there it was. I was, rage frightened. But I had made, fortunately, a programme about diet and cancer, triggered by two things. My sister being diagnosed some years earlier, my younger sister.
She had breast cancer.
She had breast cancer, and the prognosis was not good. She decided to have surgery, but no other treatment, and she would do this healthy diet, not anything peculiar, and consult a cancer nutritionist, and all these years later, she's fine, and she's never had a recurrence of cancer. But at the time, it seemed she was taking an enormous risk, and, we all know that one case doesn't prove anything. At the same time, the World Cancer Research Fund issued, I think it was their first global report about cancer incidence, and it showed that in countries where the population in general ate more whole foods, that they had much lower rates of cancer, and it wasn't a genetic thing. I was producing the food programme at the time. I thought it seems to link to another question. If good diet can keep cancer rates down, what would happen if you encouraged people to eat like that who already had cancer, been treated, were getting better? Could you slow down recurrence? Could you stop recurrence? And so that first programme asked that question. But when we rang up the cancer research places in the UK, we were treated as though we were nuts. What a daft question. This conversation in my kitchen, as I prepared a good for cancer patients easy lunch, came out of producer Natalie Donovan and I talking about the link between having cancer, that's me, and the government's National Cancer Plan for England, published earlier this year. I made my first food programme about the links between diet and cancer long before my diagnosis, so this programme is a personal update of a story that was marginal 20-odd years ago when that first programme aired, and now when it's really not so marginal. England's new cancer plan aims to save 320,000 more lives and ensure 3 out of 4 people diagnosed with cancer survive for 5 years or more by 2035. But unlike the first national plan in 2000, there's not much mention in it of food, diet. Obesity is highlighted, tackling it to be done in 2 ways: by getting supermarkets to monitor and report on sales of healthy and unhealthy foods, and by making weight loss drugs more available. There's also a commitment to improving hospital food in children's cancer wards, and then something more radical, the promise of prehabilitation. But we'll get to that later.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What was the prognosis when you were first diagnosed?
It was about that I'd probably live about 5 years.
And what was the treatment?
The treatment was chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant. But I went on a trial. I was offered a trial, and, my advice to anybody, if the NHS offers you a trial, go on the trial, because you're observed and cared for extra carefully. All right. I don't have any cheddar, but I do have feta. It's not the freshest, but it's okay.
Tastes good to me.
Yeah, good.
So you were on this trial and you were getting chemotherapy. Did anyone on the medical team talk to you about your diet?
No.
Did you ask questions? I mean...
Well, I think I probably tentatively did, but realised quite early on that I knew a lot more about it than they did, because I'd made that programme. You know, I had some sense that diet might be important. But what I observed was people, often much younger people than me, asking if there was anything they could do. Answer, no. Don't worry. You know, it was all with the kind of, you know, is there about eating? No, don't worry about it. You know, eat a balanced diet. And I thought, well, I wonder what they think a balanced diet is. There was just a sense that it didn't matter. And then, of course, there is the famous trolley. It was pushed by a volunteer, and there was tremendous, you know, kindness about the whole thing. But everything on the trolley was chocolate bars, sweets and crisps. And I thought, here we are. You know, I knew by then that part of the reason we're there, we don't know precisely. We can't quantify the link between bad diet and cancer, but we know there is a very strong link. And there we were. These poisons were going into our arms, and there was the trolley. Complete normalisation in that hospital and most other hospitals I've been in of sugary junk. And there wasn't anyone else saying, no, this probably isn't a good idea if you have cancer. All right, and we have some smoked paprika here. Hot.
So where did you turn? Where did you look for information at that time?
Somebody had told me about this book called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life, by an American physician. This is my original one. It's been updated since then. It tries to tell you about, for example, what we know about mushrooms. And what he says in here is that, you know, there are some mushrooms that are given to patients in Japanese hospitals when they're going through chemotherapy. And it just pulls together what was known at the time. You know, I tried to move my eating to having much more broccoli.
Well, was it a big change?
No, I mean, you know, I'm a reasonably good cook and I eat pretty healthily, and I don't, you know, I work at the food programme, Natalie.
Yeah. So maybe more intentional about some
I
of the
was
things.
more intentional.
And what were you kind of hoping for?
I was hoping that it would boost my immune system. It would work along with the chemo. I also took curcumin, which is the compound within turmeric. That was the main supplement I took. So I was on this chemo. I responded really well. Within 8 weeks, my numbers had dropped. But
you can't prove it was the food.
I can't know. That's the problem, because at the minute, you know, I mean, I may go off this, you know, I may fall off the cliff again any time now. But, you know, my oncologist today is the same oncologist that I saw then. And he says my immune system had really recovered in a way that he often hadn't seen in cancer patients. And 2 or 3 years ago, he said, what is it you're doing now? What is it you're doing now? I said, well, you know, I'm doing curcumin, and I'm eating all these vegetables, and I'm taking mushroom supplements, and I'm doing this and that. And he said, well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And that's what a lot of oncologists, you know, that's the position they're in. But as we hear in this program from Professor Robert Thomas, and what we hear from the head of research at the World Cancer Research Fund, is that we know a lot more now about the effect of diet on the body, on the immune system. We just know a lot more. We do know a lot more, which is what seems to have pushed the government into a commitment in that new national plan that everyone diagnosed with cancer will have access, at least by 2029, to prehabilitation. And what is that, you might ask? Well, Claire Doney is a nurse and the clinical lead for Living with and Beyond Cancer with the Northern Cancer Alliance, a group of NHS trusts in the North East. They have been pioneering prehabilitation.
Yeah, so a lot of people have heard of the word rehabilitation, which is after treatment, when you know that you need to look after yourself in the best possible way to recover as quickly as possible. Prehabilitation is that same concept, but from the point of diagnosis or from a strong suspicion of cancer. It's about making sure somebody looks after their entire self and not just their medical self.
Before we hear more from Claire Doney, let's listen to a recording made in her area, a roundtable discussion filmed by Ryan Riley, someone Claire is working with. Ryan set up and runs Life Kitchen, a charity helping people with cancer to eat well and with pleasure. And his film is part of the Northern Cancer Alliance's programme to expand prehabilitation.
Welcome to the first Life Kitchen Northern Cancer Alliance Roundtable. Chris, thanks for coming.
Ryan's talking to two cancer patients, Chris, who has incurable liver cancer, and Suzanne, who has tonsil cancer. And also, he's talking to his dad, Sean. Chris begins talking about prehabilitation.
I think it's about not waiting until it's too late to make the changes. Once you get that diagnosis of cancer, the sooner you start managing your cravings, your diet, and how you live your normal day-to-day life, I think that's more beneficial than looking at it further down the road.
Suzanne, what does prehabilitation mean to you?
Well, it meant nothing when I was diagnosed because it was never mentioned. And recently I've heard about it, but relating to exercise.
Well,
when
funnily, that is one of the three pillars of it. So it's a three-prong approach. It's exercise, mental health and nutrition. Take me back to that moment that we diagnosed. What were you told in those moments after diagnosis about what you should do before treatment?
I was told to eat as much as I could to build myself up because I was going to lose a lot of weight because of the chemotherapy and the combined radiotherapy, and I would probably be fitted with either a PEG or an NG feeding tube. So the advice was eat anything, full fat cream, full fat milk, cheese, build yourself up.
What about yourself, Chris?
My advice was pretty vague at the time. I was told that I might either put on a lot of weight or lose a lot of weight, that my appetite could go up or it could go down, and that I could experience problems with my thyroid or it could be absolutely fine.
Dad, tell me about what happened with Mum, because I wasn't there, but you were.
Well, it was a major shock. I'd never heard the word prehabilitation at all. It was probably a thing, but nobody actually said that. But this is 11, 12 years ago, so it's really just come to the fore now.
Chris, talk to me. What would you tell your younger self all about? What one bit of advice you could give?
I think slow down and be sensible at the beginning. There's a temptation when you are diagnosed to throw everything out and suddenly look for miracle cures, miracle diets, and look for something that's going to make a real difference. And people will tell you, you need to cut this out, cut that out, don't eat carbs, don't eat sugar, all of that. And the truth is that, and what you should do is have a sensible, balanced conversation with a specialist nutritionist or one of the fantastic cancer charities such as we're doing here about what is going to work for you. I think the worst advice you can give to someone who's just been told that they've got cancer is that they suddenly need to throw out some element of their life that they love. But like everyone else, I assumed that there was going to be some massive change in my diet and what I should and shouldn't eat, and it simply wasn't true.
Chris, Suzanne and Sean talking to Life Kitchen's Ryan Riley. Ryan's recipes for prehabilitation, including the one I'm making today, will soon be available to everyone via the My Wellbeing Space website created by the Northern Cancer Alliance. But online resources are not all the Alliance's planning, as Claire Doney explained.
So across the Northern Cancer Alliance, we have 8 hospital trusts. Each trust has a slightly different service, but when we talk about prehabilitation, people have a different level of need as well. So what everybody should be able to access is universal support, that support that would improve anybody.
So this is what happens between diagnosis and the beginning of chemotherapy or radiotherapy or whatever it is. It doesn't delay the treatment, but it's just that space that there is between the two things.
Yes, it will never delay their treatment. That's really important. But what it will do is also empower an individual at a point where somebody's been told they've got cancer. That can feel like a lot of decisions are being made for them. So prehabilitation is something that that person can do for themselves.
That's something that's been neglected in the past, isn't it? This sense of being able to do something for yourself.
That's what we hear from a lot of our patients. What's valuable with people like Ryan and other charitable and voluntary sector organisations, they can say that in a language that isn't maybe as medicalised.
It seems that the things he's cooking, he's majoring on pleasure. You know, they're really tasty things. But when you look at them nutritionally, you would get a lot out of these simple meals that he's cooking in those videos.
Yes, and we know Ryan has been working with one of our prehabilitation dietitians as well. He is very much about the pleasure in food, but I know that Ryan has also taken time to really understand the cost of cooking well as well and trying to make that accessible, because sometimes ingredients can feel inaccessible to some of our population for a variety of reasons. Another exciting project we're involved with across the Northern Cancer Alliance is a collaboration with our English Football League. Carlisle, Newcastle, Sunderland and Middlesbrough are going to be delivering an in-person prehabilitation offer to our cancer patients. That will be looking at physical activity. There'll also be peer support. There won't be a dietitian or a specialist working with those teams, but they will be able to signpost patients.
Do you ever wish that doctors and nurses, in fact, learned more about food and diet in the role that it plays in creating health in their training?
I think all doctors and nurses should take a holistic approach, but I also think we've got some great colleagues who can hold that knowledge for us. So really thinking about our dietitians, are we using them enough, particularly in cancer care? Is there a space to use them more? I think with a number of resources in the NHS, it can be hard to access a dietitian, but I think we need to be having that conversation. I also think we've mentioned before about charitable and voluntary sector organisations. There's a wealth of knowledge out there about nutrition, and we can use our online resources as well. We've got to make sure we get the right information to them, because I think if they just Google search, you can come up with all number of conflicting guidance. So again, I think that's where our responsibility lies, to make sure if we don't have the knowledge, we're absolutely asking the patient and then signposting them to credible knowledge.
Claire Doney from the Northern Cancer Alliance. I don't have any cheddar, but I do have feta. Mixing that together. This recipe really is very straightforward. Grated cheese mixed with some smoked paprika, giving that extra flavour hit that Ryan's recipes are known for. You spread, or more accurately squash, the cheese mixture onto the bread.
I love these sorts of recipes when it's super simple, but it just changes the flavour, so it's something you wouldn't expect.
Did you put some oil in or something?
No, but you could maybe sprinkle a bit over, because your cheese isn't going to be as melty as his cheese.
So bread and cheese mixes in the pan, and while it cooks, let's go back to the cancer plan. The government's commitment is that by 2028, prehabilitation will have rolled out via the NHS App, focusing on services available in community settings, though the plan at this stage seems more focused on exercise than on food.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the cancer plan for England. So it's 86 pages. So if I put in food first,
Right.
it's found 20 mentions of food.
We're doing a non-scientific scan of the document for the word food. There are 20, almost all relating to one government policy action to end what it calls the obesity epidemic.
We will follow through on our moonshot to end the obesity epidemic by accelerating GLP-1 medicine uptake through mandatory health reporting and a new healthy standard for large food and drink retailers. What they're saying is that they're hoping that this will help the public make healthier choices.
Can you go back, because there was a little box from a cancer patient, what that cancer patient wanted.
What, this?
Yeah. This is patient voice. It's a little box in the report. It says, I think the dangers of tobacco are well documented and smokers are fully aware of the risk to cancer. However, I think the general public still isn't aware of the dangers of physical inactivity, alcohol and obesity in relation to cancer. And the best way, as we've made programs before, is that you change the food environment. Let's try and build a better food culture in Britain. Let's work on school meals. Well, they give them credit. They are working on school meals. Let's work on hospital food. Let's get teaching of growing and cooking into primary schools. Let's do simple things. Address much more directly a food culture that is, it seems to be, linked to increasing levels of cancer. Well, those, of course, are just my thoughts. Someone who has more than thoughts is an unusual oncologist who was involved in writing England's first ever cancer plan?
My name's Robert Thomas. I'm a mainstream oncologist specialising in breast and prostate, chemotherapy, radiotherapy and biological treatments most of the time, but I also am what we call an integrative oncology in this building where we are now, the Royal Hospital for Integrative Medicine. And that job is to look at nutritional and self-help strategies, support cancer treatment and improve outcomes. On top of that, I'm very fortunate to lead a research laboratory looking at specific elements of food and how we can enhance those for better effects. And I'm happy to talk more about that.
This year, the government published a cancer plan, 2026. You were involved in the cancer plan that was published in 2000, 26 years ago. I know you were a bit surprised by this year's plan.
It seems a long time ago, doesn't it? 26 years. But Mike Richards at the time asked us to do a chapter on diet and how that affects the risk of cancer and improve cancer outcomes. So, we're very pleased with that. And although the current cancer plan is actually a very good document for many things, so I don't want to discredit it, it's very good for looking at early diagnosis and having access to high-cost drugs. But it's a little bit surprising that there's very little mentioned on nutrition. So we seem to have gone, backwards over the last 26 years.
But what did you say in 2000?
Well, we looked at the evidence to show that people who have a good diet and specific things in that, fibre and phytochemicals and things, reaps benefit. You can reduce the risk of cancer. And looked at the evidence for people who've changed their diet after cancer and how it reduced the risk of relapse, which are all positive. So, really that message, I think, should have been reinforced in the current cancer plan. It could be that they just wanted a clear, crisp message, but, it could come down to the fact that the type of research which supports nutrition tends to be observational and population, and the grade A type double-blind, randomized, robust data seems to be a little bit lacking. And that's what the authors of these documents tend to look at, which is why we as a cancer unit are concentrating on that sort of trial.
I wondered what Professor Thomas made of England's cancer plan's new emphasis on prehabilitation.
The evidence for prehab is very, very strong. In fact, the Royal College of Anaesthetists, in partnership with Macmillan, just before COVID, had an advisory committee, and I was on that, and we looked at the evidence. People come out of hospital quicker, they have less complications such as blood clots. And, there's a school of thought that it could, the tumour could be altered, so when you manipulated it, they could have better outcomes.
And what about when you're being a more conventional oncologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital, which is the big teaching hospital in Cambridge? How do you talk to your patients there?
Well, I don't see my two roles as very different. I think all oncologists should be integrating lifestyle and nutrition advice as part of their main treatment. But I have to say, there are some colleagues which do, and others say I'm just too busy. But it's what patients want to hear. They want to know how to help themselves.
But, I've spent a lot of time lying on those day beds in, the chemotherapy day wards. And they mean so well, but, somebody will ask a question about eating and they say, it doesn't matter, love. It doesn't matter what you eat. And, I want to stand up and go, that's absolutely wrong. Because, there's so much goodness and kindness in what is being said and how it's being said and the intention. You would get really, really confused.
A lot of patients are told the wrong thing, unfortunately. In fact, we did an audit recently where we looked at what patients have been told, and we put it into 3 categories: virtually nothing, the right information, and the wrong information. And there was 65% either had the wrong information or not enough. I saw a patient the other day who was a big city executive. He was told by his oncologist, there's nothing you can do to help yourself. For him, he said that was the worst thing he was told. And I said, look, this is not my opinion. I'm only giving evidence-based advice here. There is a lot you can do. Your cancer could still progress, but it could still progress on mainstream treatments as well. But you can improve your side effects, reduce your chronic risks, and your chance of being cured will significantly improve. This is hard fact, and the trials we've been doing more recently are showing that. Unfortunately, they are being noticed, but maybe their influence is a bit slower than we'd want.
We'll hear more from Professor Thomas on foods for prostate cancer in a few minutes. We invited the Department of Health to be part of this programme, but they declined. So we put it to them that the Cancer Plan for England has a limited focus on food, nutrition, as a core element of cancer prevention and treatment, and that diet and nutrition does not appear to feature as a central strategic priority. They responded with this statement.
This is an unfair characterisation of the National Cancer Plan, which sets out how the government will create a healthier nation by working with food retailers and the public to address diet and nutrition. It also includes specific action to improve hospital food for children and young people with cancer. In addition, this analysis ignores our groundbreaking 10-year health plan, which outlines a range of bold, preventative measures to tackle obesity, including restricting junk food advertising on television before 9 p.m. and at all times online, while giving local authorities stronger powers to stop fast food shops opening near schools.
So we are putting this in. The cheesy kimchi toasty is coming along and smelling very good. Kimchi, as you probably know, is a traditional Korean staple made of salted fermented vegetables, usually napa cabbage and radishes, sometimes carrots, sometimes other vegetables, mixed with a paste of chili, garlic and ginger. It really is delicious, very spicy and packed with probiotics. We learned to love it during COVID and now it's widely available. It's also easy to make. Okay, kimchi.
Do you buy kimchi regularly?
I do now, because as Professor Robert Thomas says, he advises his patients to have fermented foods, 2 or 3 times a day.
It's quite spicy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are lots of other fermented foods that are not spicy. One of my favourite sandwiches is a toasted sandwich, a bit like this, with fresh tomatoes and cheese and sauerkraut. Sauerkraut, kimchi are just 2 foods in the preventing, recovering from cancer armoury. But what is that armoury? What do we know about which foods seem to encourage cancer development and which are preventative and even healing? These are questions Dr. Giota Mitru has been working on for years. Her interest in the role of diet and cancer began during her PhD at the University of Cambridge. She's now Executive Director of Research and Policy at the World Cancer Research Fund International, WCRF, a not-for-profit that focuses on how diet, weight and physical activity can affect the risk of developing and surviving cancer.
When I first started my PhD, I was interested in understanding disease risk in large population studies. So immediately I was drawn into cancer prevention. At the same time, I came across the first expert report that was developed by the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research in 1997. And that was the first attempt to really try to collate the evidence linking diet, nutrition, and cancer. Back then, that was a concept that was not very well accepted by people. And when that report came out, it was the Bible for many of the young scientists, including myself.
Over the years, the fund has published a series of these expert reports which underpin the evidence for their list of 10 cancer prevention recommendations. The recommendations include eating whole grains, vegetables, fruit and beans, limiting fast foods, limiting red and processed meat, and sugar-sweetened drinks. I remember that first report in 1997 because we worked on that into a program. I remember the skepticism of the conventional medical establishment that this was merely epidemiology and that it didn't actually tell you anything very significant. You would disagree with that, and time has proved them wrong.
Time has proven many people wrong, I would say. The messages that we were trying to advocate and really prove scientifically have been absorbed, and that's the standard messages. Between 1960s and 2010s, there have been about 60 cohort studies, epidemiological studies, trying to better understand the links of all of these lifestyle factors and cancer. It is massive. And maybe not everyone knows that, it was WCRF and AICR that started that, but it doesn't matter in a way, because I can still see that the take-up of those recommendations on a day-to-day basis are not fully done, and therefore we have more work to do.
We're discussing the recent National Cancer Plan for England. And your organisation said at the time you felt it was an ambitious plan, but there was a but. But what?
So the but is that we would have liked to see prevention much more central in the plan. We are concerned about increasing the health inequalities because, as we know, tens of thousands of additional cancer cases across the UK can be attributed to socio-economic deprivation. So a plan that doesn't have cancer prevention central will have an impact on populations that are suffering. They don't have the means to have a healthy diet. The fast food culture is affordable for them and easy to have something on the go.
Well, tell me about the large piece of research you're currently working on, which is to do with ultra-processed foods.
So ultra-processed foods is one of the reviews that they are in the pipeline at the moment, together with some additional important topic. So specifically on ultra-processed foods, it's the first rigorous attempt to collate and synthesize all the studies that they have looked on ultra-processed foods and 19 cancer types.
I mean, the context of you doing this research, of course, is the fact that younger and younger people are getting cancers, which once were for the late middle-aged and the elderly. And perhaps the most worrying one is the increase in people under the age of 40 getting bowel cancers.
We do see a larger number of individuals getting cancer below the normal age of 60s. This is something that is under investigation. Obesity is linked to so many cancers, and the consumption of ultra-processed food also are on the rise, and they are highly calorific. Also, we know that maybe early life exposures, that they play a role. The limitation we have there is most of the studies, they have looked at individuals in adulthood, and therefore we are missing all that information and the exposure early on in life.
Dr. Giota Mitru from the World Cancer Research Fund International. So far, we've looked at the evidence for diet when it comes to prevention and prehabilitation, that time before treatment, but there's now research being done into the impact of specific foods and exercise during treatment. Oncologist Professor Robert Thomas says this is rarely part of the conversations between oncologists and patients.
We started the first major double-blind randomized trial, which are the most robust medical trials, back in 2012, looking at different elements of food for prostate cancer, looking at different exercise strategies. And more recently, we looked at dietary strategies during COVID. And the last big trial we've done, which we've just published, is looking at progression rates in men in prostate cancer and things like measurements of whole body inflammation, which actually was published not only in a cancer journal, but in a longevity journal. Because all the things we deal with diet aren't just helping one thing, they're helping many things. So you can do a trial looking at, say, the rate of progression of prostate cancer, but at the same time, when you're improving the diet and gut health, it's helping them with their overall well-being, their fatigue, their strength. So it's almost an all-win situation concentrating on diet. And it is the most cost-efficient way to save money for the NHS and health providers.
What kind of foods would you be advising men with prostate cancer to eat?
Well, I specialise in prostate cancer, and so that I have a lot of men. And the nice thing about prostate cancer is about 55 to 60% have a lower grade, less aggressive type, which you can observe. So in that period of observation, you can, do dietary experiments, which we've done. 2013, we looked at various foods based on smaller studies, things like pomegranate extract, green tea, turmeric, broccoli and cruciferous vegetables. So we did a trial back then looking at concentrating those foods, and we did indeed see that if you increased those, and we used a capsule at the time, but if you increased those, you did see a slowing of the cancer. More recently, other people around the world are looking at different foods such as cranberry, ginger, which is an amazing anti-inflammatory food, and it enhances the absorption of other foods. And we looked at ways to not only give a capsule which can have these foods in it, but there are modern food techniques where you can extract like the essence from, say, broccoli and re-add it in. So you can get a capsule which is then stronger, more fortified. And we repeated a study and found that that particular capsule showed an even greater benefit on slowing PSA. And this time we looked at MRI changes as well, and we saw there was a significant number of patients actually had a reduction in their tumour size. So this is not just a blood test effect.
Professor Robert Thomas. He's a cancer researcher, head of oncology at the Royal London Hospital for Integrated Medicine, which is part of University College Hospital, and consultant oncologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And you can read much more about his research online.
Why do frozen berries prevent cancer? So there's research with berries that's so...
Social media is full of videos of so-called experts and influencers sharing their knowledge about cancer and diet. And it's not easy to tell the useful from the obsessive or the scary or just plain harmful. Producer Natalie showed me a few she'd found on Instagram.
These different molecules can help to either make cancer.
Do you want to keep watching?
So that it's not likely.
It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the Mayo Clinic, one of the most reputable hospital groups in the United States.
Does it surprise you that they are putting that out there?
Yeah, in a funny way, there's so much wrong with the American medical system, but they have been much more radical because it is such a fractured system. So you can have the Cleveland Clinic, for example, the Mayo Clinic. You can have these parts of the medical system just doing quite radical things, looking at studies on food. The NHS is a behemoth. It's what you can say and do and prescribe is big, and it's very hard to break away from that. All right, what's the next one?
Okay, let's see.
Can a handful of walnuts help you live longer with cancer? Science says yes, and the data is compelling. Multiple laboratory, animal, and human studies suggest that frequent walnut consumption may reduce cancer risk and improve survival.
I'd be much more skeptical about that. The evidence does show that nuts, they're an important part of a diet, fantastic fiber benefits and, other things. It's just that it sort of simply, like walnuts. Well,
eat those.
Yeah, eat those. Yeah, have some walnuts, but have other nuts, have seeds, have vegetables, have fruit. There's a lot of that about. But for the puzzled and frightened and their families and friends, the World Cancer Research Fund has a cancer and nutrition helpline. I asked Dr. Giota Mitru if they get a lot of questions from people checking online claims for cures.
There are questions like that, many questions like that as well. There is so much information on social media, and there is so much misinformation on social media. When it comes to supplements, for example, we don't have any evidence that supplements are beneficial for cancer survivors. But there may be some occasions that they are recommended by the health professional team, and that's where actually is always important that the patient works with the health professionals, but also really trusts, looks for the authoritative voice and organizations that they are evidence-based.
Dr. Giota Mitru. Have a look at what WCRF has online about their Cancer Prevention Action Week. Its theme this year is Science, Not Fiction. Evidence saves lives. All right, so here we are with our kimchi, feta, lots of fermented vegetables. What do you think?
That's really good. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, the creaminess of the cheese and the spices. Yeah. It actually has this sort of fast foodish thing going on to it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the nice fried egg on top.
I think this is a really nice way of eating kimchi, actually.
Yeah. Well done, Ron.
Sheila. Well done, Sheila. So would you say cancer still has an impact on how you eat now?
Yeah, it's probably made me, much more aware of. I eat more vegetables. I eat more fish. It's funny,
Are there things you don't eat?
Junk food, but I didn't eat much of that anyway. I mean, I find crisps very appealing, but I try not to eat too many crisps. I mean, it's not that hard if you do what I do. I didn't eat junk food in the first place, or I wouldn't be on the food program, would I? But it is hard for people. I can cook. I'm a generation new, I learned to cook. I had a mother who cooked, I had a grandma who cooked. And therefore I cook, so it's easy for me. It's not easy if you're on a low income, you've never learned to cook, and you don't know what to do with raw stuff. You've got cancer. It's so difficult, isn't it? It is, but change is a-coming, at least in cancer services. I asked Claire Doney what difference their prehabilitation programmes have been making to the patients she sees in the northeast of England.
We've got a number of really strong patient voices around prehabilitation and the impact that's had, particularly around feeling empowered, like somebody can do something about their own outcomes. But prehabilitation, what we hope is that experience will last beyond the intervention. It's then to be continued through treatment, after treatment, and hopefully beyond somebody living with and beyond cancer. That's what we hear from some of our patients, is that actually it's quite life-changing thinking about things differently. And the way we treat cancer is so very different now. People can often now be on treatment for a number of years. People can live with cancer for a number of years. So cancer looks very different today than it did 20 years ago. Our patients look very different. They're much more informed. They want to be partners in their care. And I think it's important that we adapt and change and meet that need. And for those that perhaps aren't as informed, that we can make sure we provide that information and support.
Claire Doney from the Northern Cancer Alliance. If you're interested in or have been affected by any of what we've been talking about, please go to our website. All the links are there. Thanks for listening. Always interesting to hear your views. If you have any on this subject, please email us at thefoodprogram@bbc.co.uk. The programme was presented by me, Sheila Dillon, and produced at BBC Bristol by Natalie Donovan.
I'm Kate Lamble, and from Understand from BBC Radio 4, this is Rinsed.
Last time I was here, there was a tampon and there was a condom.
A sewage scandal damaging our rivers.
We had an enormous range of animals in the garden, and that also started to disappear.
Uncovered by ordinary folk taking on powerful people.
And they told me, there's nothing wrong with the River Windrush. Basically, go away and stop troubling us.
This is the story of how a centuries-old battle between public good and private profit created an almighty stink, and who pays to clean it up. Rinsed. Listen first on BBC Sounds.
And I thought, nah, you're the problem.